Oh, there we go. All right, now we are broadcasting. Okay, so I'm very excited today for my Mindgasms podcast. We're gonna do a three-way idea sex tag team with Ed Kennedy, also known as Sam's Bulldog, and D Canfield, also known as Hunter's Pug. So we're gonna try to have like a uh, two dogs playing instead of a dog fight. That sounds more fun to me. But I'm sure it'll get heated at times too. But the thing that I like the most about both of you guys, I would say, is that uh, you can have vehement disagreements. Both of you can have vehement disagreements with people that still come away respecting each other, and you can joke around and stuff, and no one's feelings get hurt. So that's what I really like about both of you guys. And I guess I probably got to know Ed a little bit through debating with him on Twitter about stuff, as people do. And then we got into much better conversations on the Mixed Mental Arts chat. Of course, for those people who don't know, Mixed Mental Arts is an awesome podcast about idea sex and learning with the awesome comedian and actor Brian Callen and his super awesome co-host Hunter Maats. And let's see, for D. Oh yeah, I guess I got to know D uh, from debating with him on the Mixed Mental Arts Facebook group. And then with both of you guys, when I talked to each of you on my YouTube channel, I found out that, as you often do when you actually have conversations with people, you actually find out that you agree about a lot more than you thought that you did, and you have really great conversations. So yeah, well, I don't know which one of you guys wants to start off, but why don't you guys each introduce yourselves to everyone, and then we can maybe talk about Christopher Hitchens, like I said too, because I know all three of us love him.
Well, how about I jump in because you said how you met both of us, but I guess it would be good to illustrate how we know each other, right? And I guess pretty straightforward. I ripped his Twitter account and made made a comedy parody version of it. Using I think I still have the same picture out, don't I?
Flattering. Yeah, I was flattered.
But honestly, it was just interesting. It was just a little funny thing, and pretty quickly, I think we found common ground. I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Sam's Bulldog. My real name is Edward Kennedy. I met these two gentlemen through Mixed Mental Arts. I got to mental arts. I discovered mixed mental arts because at the time, Hunter Maats he was using the word terrorism. Now I can't remember what was he doing. He was like trolling terrorism or something like that. He was bad mouthing Sam Harris, intentionally lying about Sam Harris's views, which he admitted because he was trying to get attention at the time. Which he
Wait, so how was he intentionally lying about it? Like, what
He was
you mean,
trolling.
like when he was trolling about it?
Yeah,
What?
yeah, he was throwing up lots of videos, just, and his views were, he was, everything he said about him was not something, wasn't a matter of an opinion. He was discussing his specific views, and he was getting them all wrong. And so when I started my channel right on a year ago, he was a perfect target for me because everything that came out of his mouth was wrong. On, again, specifically on Sam's views, not about the science or taking issue with specific views.
And it seems like his trolling worked, right? Because now you're a part of Mixed Mental Arts.
He went through an awful lot to get one person to call into his podcast, but we've since buried the hatchet, and he's changed. And I mean, anybody can go back and watch my videos where I play him speaking. I play his video in the background, and then I stop it and comment and count the 27 errors of his ways in a 20-minute talk about Sam Harris. So that's how he started, and he did admit that he was doing that for a reason, to see if he could get attention online, and that's when created the Hunter's Pug, which is a great send up. And I was flattered to have the attention on social media. Any attention on social media is positive attention, right? So that got me calling it to mixed mental arts, and you and I, Andrew, had some back and forth on Twitter, respectful differences of opinion. It never got personal or anything like that. And I've been following Dee's Twitter feed. I don't agree with everything he says, of course, but I like his point of view. I like he's a good tweeter. He knows how to be concise and throw in a nice comment. And I've always enjoyed your Mindgasms podcast and I've said this before on the MMA podcast, Andrew, that you're an excellent interviewer because you're patient with your questions. You're probing when you ask, and I like that. And you're willing to listen. So I think you're a little too willing to listen sometimes, but maybe we'll talk about that.
That's the Hitchens coming.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's a good segue into Hitchens.
Hitchens, man. He can I just talk about him briefly, because I saw him. I know I mentioned it on a Mixed Mental Arts, but I went to a New York Times presentation in the city, New York City, where they were discussing who owns antiquity. So it was a discussion panel with the head of the Harvard Museum, who had just written a book, a woman whose name escapes me at the moment, who had just written a book about the same thing. In other words, do the people who live in modern day Egypt, should they own the ancient Egyptian relics merely because the modern state of Egypt happens to reside in the geographical location of where those ruins are? That was what the discussion was about. And Hitch was there. And Hitch,
was he part of the debate?
He was, yeah. It was.
What side was he on?
Hitchens wrote a book, which I read before I went in, which is about 150 pages, about the Elgin marbles, which are the marbles that were cut from the friezes of the Parthenon in Athens in Greece. It was in the early 19th century where Lord Elgin, this is when Turkey controlled Greece. Lord Elgin was there, and he was a wealthy guy, and he wanted to take some of this statuary art home with him. So he cut away or stole a lot of statuary art and shipped them back to Britain, and they're now in the British Museum. And Greece has always wanted them back, and that's kind of a long story I could talk about if you want. But so
was that debate that Stephen Fry participated in too, or am I remembering a different one?
No, that was on Catholicism, which is one of the, if you're thinking about the one where there's a woman on the panel, a female politician and a bishop. Hitch was in rare form that night. I've seen that debate. But it was awesome to see Hitch there, and I'll tell you, because I wanted to ask him a question, because I've been to Greece twice, and I've read 27 books or something like that. I'm not bragging. When I first moved to where I moved and I first got married, I was commuting for the first time ever, and this is before smartphones. So I would read on my commute, and I read book after book about ancient Greece and the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I read Hitchens' book, and I really see it from Greece's perspective. They should get those marbles back. So I had skin in the game when I saw him, and I knew about him for a long time. So anyway, it was a small venue. It was maybe 200 people there or something. And I could have asked a question, because they ask for questions, and barely anybody says anything. So it's like being back in school and no one wants to ask a question. And I chickened out, and it bothers me. And then they were signing books after downstairs, and I go down there, I rebuy the same book to get Hitchens to sign it. And he took off at the end. He wasn't signing books. So I didn't have an opportunity. I shook the hand of everybody else on the panel, but I didn't, and spoke to them, but I didn't have a chance. I didn't have an opportunity to meet him, but I saw him speak live, and it means a lot to me.
Should have like had a drink with him, man.
Oh yeah. We wound up on the floor afterwards.
Yeah, really.
Do you know what he calls Scott? You know, I'm sorry. His favorite drink was Johnny Walker Black with Perrier without ice. And he referred to Scotch as Mr. Walker's Amber Restorative.
It sounds like how my old Russian Ukrainian neighbor used to talk about vodka. You know, it's good for you. It kills all bad things. You know?
Yeah, he was a special person, and everybody talks about how awesome it would be, and everybody, if he was still around, and speculate on what his views would be of Trump, etc. I mean, could you imagine Hitch with Twitter? Although I don't think he would ever do Twitter.
I think he would really be against Trump, I think.
But he hated the Clintons. He wrote about the Clintons. He wrote a book about the Clintons.
He would have.
Yeah, he would probably be really against Hillary Clinton too, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. Hitch hated liars and pathological people. I mean, but you know, politics aside, I mean, how could you see him standing by what's going on right now? I mean, there's just no way possible.
Exactly.
But the other thing is, like, people like to speculate on people's views, and I try not even to go there, because I mean, Hitch was clearly wrong about 9/11. Let's be real.
About the Iraq War, you mean?
I mean, yeah. After.
Oh, you mean how he supported the Iraq War?
Everything after 9/11, he was wrong about. I mean,
Yeah.
he just was, and like his best friends will tell you the same thing. Salman Rushdie will tell you, you know, I mean, he was wrong, and it was crazy too, because he's, you know, this like lifelong leftist and always, you know, backing working people and all this, and then, you know, he's backing these like lunatic libertarians nonetheless, you know, who are just like trying to destabilize his place and have no idea about. But I you know, if you know about Hitchens, then you know that he was hyper focused on the Kurds.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and like I really think like that kind of like tunnel visioned him, and
You're right.
And people who don't know about him just go. I mean, it's really sad, because like smart people, you know, in New York City all the time, you bring up Hitchens and they go right, oh, he's a neocon, boom, and I'm like, man,
No,
you know, fucking Dick Cheney's a neocon.
He wasn't a neocon, man.
You know, like Dick Cheney's a neocon. You can't.
he's a former communist. I mean, literally.
Yeah, exactly. And so I mean,
and I agree with you. I think that that damaged his. I mean, I like the fact that everything the people I listen to isn't expected, right? You want intellectuals that you admire to have views that surprise you. So in a way, it was like a test for me, because I was for the Iraq War before it started. You know, like I can clearly remember justifying in my mind that we had to do something in the wake of 9/11, and again, hindsight's 20/20, right? I mean, but to stick by that, if he was around now, he'd still be defending it, presumably. But there's a famous debate with him and that guy Galway, I think he's either Irish, I guess he's a British.
George Galloway.
Galloway, exactly.
Oh yeah, Galloway.
You had a debate.
Galloway in that one.
It is the most fucking spirited debate you have ever heard, and to hear Hitch talk about it, he's almost persuasive that this was something worth doing. I mean, but you know, on balance, with
a dream. It was a dream. Like these savages, Bremer and all these guys are gonna go in and help the Kurds and give them some sort of sovereignty. Yeah, right. I mean, they just you know what happened? They abandoned them.
Well, I mean, the issue is at what cost, right? I mean, Iraq is a better place than it was for sure today than it was then. Okay,
Really?
Yeah, there's no suicide. There were suicide bombings galore after we popped the top off of that place.
I think
Well, the thing about Hitchens though, and the reason why some people might label him as neoconservative is like, I think the same way, the same reason that like a self-proclaimed neoconservative like Douglas Murray, for example, who kind of reminds me of Hitchens in a few of the, like, in terms of the way that he argues and stuff. Like, for me, I've found some of his neoconservative arguments actually convincing until I heard other arguments that were better than that. So for a while, I was almost like kind of convinced that like spreading traditional classical liberal Western values of democracy and everything like that all throughout the world was a good idea. You know what I mean?
It's a good idea in theory, but when you try to practice it, it winds up being a disaster.
Exactly. Yeah. That's actually an interesting difference between like Sam Harris and Hunter Maats too, actually, right? Like in terms of like interfering in foreign conflicts like in the Middle East and stuff like that, right?
Well, I mean, I'm going to spend our time talking about Harris, but he was on record as being against the Iraq War. A rarity.
Yeah, he openly disagreed with Hitchens about that for sure.
Yeah, and rightly so. But I think I'm not sure his views on the whole situation are completely sound. I think. And I think because I agree with a lot of what he says, and especially his criticisms of Islam. Like, I agree with a lot of them. The problem I have with him is he doesn't have a better solution, and I think that often leads you to say like, oh well, like then we should probably still bomb these people, but I mean he's not. He didn't back the invasion, but he's no dove, and
yeah. I tell you, I mean, Twitter would agree with you.
Yeah, he seems to think that America always has good intentions.
Nah, I don't know about that.
Did you see the what's that guy's name? Zakaria, the debate with him and
yeah, sure, on CNN, Fareed Zakaria.
Yeah, no, they did a podcast, I thought.
No. Oh, maybe they did.
They did a podcast.
No, he was on Zakaria's show right after the Bill Maher, it's gross, it's racist.
Oh, that
sure
thing.
Zakaria wasn't on his podcast?
I think
he might have been.
think so. Maybe.
It was a long conversation. That's why I think it was, it wasn't like TV form. But anyway, it was a really good conversation, and I think it exposed. Because again, I agree with most. When I attack Harris, I'm attacking the nuance. You know what I mean? I agree with 90% of what he has to say, except for having Charles Murray on his show.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. Like you and I have discussed before too, Ed. Right? Like I agree with a lot of what he says. I just publicly disagree with him about this small number of things that I disagree with him about.
Sure. Yeah. All right. I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, that's, again, it's a matter of emphasis. It's a matter of, it's tomato. I've seen everything the guy's said publicly that's been published. I've met him. I've read everything he's written, basically, some of it more than once. I mean, every time he's interviewed now, I know what he's going to say next about anything. I mean, like how much. He's got his views, maybe they'll change or whatever, but I have to say that my persona, my channel on YouTube and all is, I may change my name, because if you look on Twitter and you punch up Sam Harris and you look at recent tweets and I scan them, it's something like 2 out of 3 think the guy is nothing like the way he is. He's being grouped together with Jordan Peterson and the dark web or whatever.
And even worse, Dave Rubin.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about Dave Rubin too.
Do you guys not like Dave Rubin?
Fucking
I
hate
don't have
Dave.
a problem with him.
Dave Rubin is the worst.
He's a sap.
Why?
And
Why is he the worst?
I don't want to get into a I don't want to trash Dave Rubin, but I mean,
why not?
okay, fuck it, we'll trash Dave Rubin, whatever. I'm not driving, right? Whatever. Dave Rubin makes a living off of the idea that people on the left are mean to him, and that there's some vast conspiracy against free speech on college campuses, and
Oh,
like
do you mean
all
this thing that people like Isaiah and I'm not saying I disagree with this necessarily, say that Jordan Peterson thinks too?
yeah, it's in that whole circle. I mean that Brett Weinstein, and like the reason these people are interesting is because there is like one central idea that like we're all circling around, and when it really comes down to it, it's not Shapiro is not important, and like Sam's important because he shows a weakness in his. I'm glad he's back now because I don't want to talk.
Sorry.
That's
Sorry.
all good.
I think you're about to talk about how Sam Harris's weakness is
Yes,
that
I am. And
he always thinks that the
I wanted
problem
you to
is
come back.
religion, maybe?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's central to the debate between him and Hunter, and besides all the trolling, I think the whole idea between them that divides them is that Sam thinks he's some sort of completely rational person who has no underlying motivations, that he doesn't really understand
Right.
consciously.
That he's immune to irrational thinking when he comes to his
Not
conclusions.
that I'm not. I didn't say that because that you take it to a further level than I did, and then like you can discredit it, but it's not really what I'm saying. I'm not saying he thinks he's like a perfectly rational person. I'm saying that,
Which is what that Robert Wright Wired article that came out last week. Perfect rationality is a myth.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, see,
exactly.
that was interesting, right? Like I agreed. I actually agreed with most of that article, but like I also thought, like, I disagreed with Ezra Klein, like, probably just as much as I disagreed with Sam Harris in that conversation. I would think I disagreed with both of them a lot, but I also think that one part of that article, even though I liked that article overall a lot, and I thought it made a lot of sense, I thought it kind of mischaracterized Sam Harris's reaction to the like allegations against Lawrence Krauss for sexual assault or something like that, because they made it sound like he was trying to excuse it away. But if you actually listen to him talking about that on his podcast, he was saying how terrible it is and how they canceled their next event because of that.
Yeah.
I mean, listen. I think like we all know that there's people out there, and a lot of them are on the left, who just want to discredit people, and they do it with Peterson, and they do it. It's with Shapiro, it's warranted, but with the rest of them, like
wait,
Peterson,
why is it warranted for Shapiro?
we'll talk about later.
Okay, well, let's talk
with people
about that.
like Peterson and Harris, that they have something to say, and it's important, and I think this whole thing is really circles around Peterson now. Like what we are all circling around is what Peterson is addressing, and I don't totally agree with him. But what he's addressing is that there is a story that that we kind of ride on top of, like the rider and the elephant, and we don't, it's subconscious, and it's kind of whether it's a myth that you hear as a kid or whatever. There's some like story that guides you and that helps your morals or something, and it's something like it's very difficult to explain. That's what Peterson's trying to strive for and explain. And it's a problem because he has a lot of issues. Like, he's completely traumatized by the Soviet Union, and he thinks, like, if we do anything to level the playing field, we're going right to the gulag. So it kind of, it's tough to like separate those things. But like, he has a point. There's a reason he's famous, and it's not just because he trashed some transgendered people.
Well said.
Right?
He has an appeal to a certain community that feel disenfranchised, and he's a self-help guru, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't. I would say that all you want to get.
I like his self-help guru stuff.
I mean, the new atheists are self-help gurus on philosophy and science and awareness raising about the pernicious beliefs.
Just be rational, bro. Don't be religious. Be rational.
Well, that Robert Wright, if that's his first name, he's had him on the podcast. He's helped him sell books, and I listened to that. Why is Buddhism true? And I take him for a pretty serious person. What little I know about him.
What did you think of that? What did you think of that book, Ed?
I didn't read the book. I listened to the podcast.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I listened to the podcast too. I thought you said you listened to the book.
No. If I did, I misspoke. Sam Harris was a practicing Buddhist. He was for a short time, was a bodyguard for the Dalai Lama. So he's met the Dalai Lama. I mean, he was.
Oh, I didn't know that. I knew that part, but not the second part.
That's pretty cool shit, man. That's awesome. It is awesome. I mean, I've listened to a lot of things, not a lot, a few things that the Dalai Lama has said, and he's a fascinating person, and he believes some crazy. So Sam jettisoned all of the mythical thinking involved with Buddhism in the traditions, and kept the other stuff like
mental arts principle right there, right?
But
like, what is useful, ignore what is not, and make it uniquely your own. That's what he did with Buddhism.
That's Joseph Campbell, huh?
Yeah, and the Dalai Lama has said if science were to conclusively prove that certain tenets of Buddhism were not factual, then science wins. I mean, that's the kind of spiritual leaders we need in this world. Yeah. I mean, that's a guy who's not all caught up in dogma. It's a guy who actually cares about the well-being.
He's kind of caught up in the dogma of science, though.
Science has no dogma.
It's people can get dogmatic about science, though.
Well, I mean, I'll look up the definition. A dogma is something that has to be believed. That is
one criticism that I think Dee might share with me about Sam Harris is that he gets dogmatic about science sometimes, in that he acts like, okay, we can use science to define morality, and science will be the way that we determine everything, and we can use our rational reason to figure everything out, which is not even like scientifically true.
Well, let me ask you a question. When is it a good time to be irrational about decision making? I would argue
it's not that it's good to be irrational. It's that we always use our emotions to make decisions. So this idea that we're rational when we do science and when we make decisions and when we learn lessons from science that we choose to see as objective, we're all viewing this through our emotional lenses and our individual psychologies that are shaped by our culture and our upbringings and our interactions with people in our environments.
Without a doubt. But who doesn't know that about science? That's what I.
Well, the point is that Sam Harris almost never says that.
See, I don't. Well, I don't agree. I don't agree. I mean, I
think he probably understands that, and people don't give him credit for that. To be fair, I really do think that. But I think that he often just doesn't say that, so then people think that. You know what I mean?
Right. And this is why the Wright piece can be considered kind of a hit piece. If you go around, like Sam does, criticizing the irrational jumps in logic or the imprecise language or the claims without evidence, and you call out your interlocutor there for that stuff, that doesn't mean you're sitting on the Temple Mount with perfect objectivity. Okay, this is what annoys me about this, is that he's just more rational in his thinking than the average person.
But hasn't he himself pointed out at least a few times that, like, to a terrorist, for example, based on their ideology, their actions might seem rational to them? So, like, he almost like makes his own point that that is a criticism of him, which is that people, like, depending on your worldview, anything can seem rational and anything can seem irrational.
Oh, if you believe the Quran is the word of the creator of the universe, as he always says, then the behavior of ISIS is perfectly rational. If that's the way the universe is, we should all be joining immediately, right? We should all be on jihad.
But isn't this why the Charles?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, D.
Isn't this why the Charles Murray thing is like it keeps hitting over and over again? It keeps this is the core issue, because whether let's say his science is sound.
Whose science? Charles Murray's?
Let's say Murray's science is sound. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
And so we don't have to debate that. Harris, by the way, seems to be pretty set on the fact that his science is sound, and I'm not so sure.
Yeah, he does. And I'm not so sure. He mentioned that on that Ezra Klein podcast.
I would nuance that a little, but go ahead, finish your point, D.
Well, I mean, okay, but let's say it is sound. If you say that white people are more intelligent than black people on average genetically, then the problem is that policy gets crafted from that conclusion. And I think that was the center of
why is that? Why
you're afraid of the truth. So what you're saying is you're afraid if the truth gets out that
no. What is that? Well, why do you start there? I just said
You said let's say that this is true. Let's say we know this is all true.
I'm not debating his science. That's what I'm saying. I'm not for the purposes of this, like, let's say it is true. Why wouldn't you just put white people in positions of high power? Why wouldn't you preference white kids and groom them?
It wouldn't be white, it would be Asians, because the Asians are
whatever. Okay, fine.
How
much of a difference is it, though? Isn't it a small difference, even if there is a difference?
Here it is. From what I understand, is the lion's share of the data, which again could be wrong. We could find out tomorrow. That there are things like the number of books in the house have an effect on IQ that Hunter brought up in one of our MMA chats. But what apparently is not controversial is that IQ tests work in the sense that they are predictive of outcomes in the future about quality of life, advancement, not just things like income, but health, longevity of life, and so on. So people with 140 IQs.
How did smart people are healthier and live longer?
Yes, generally speaking.
I don't understand.
The higher IQ you are, the better off you are in general.
Right, but you see why this is the crux of the issue, because
how do you define those terms? Quality of life too. Sorry, I interrupted you.
What I'm saying is that, and again, I'm not an expert here, right? I'm not that interested in all this stuff either. But I want to get back to why he had him on the podcast and what his whole point was, which gets lost on Twitter. But apparently, no one disputes that IQ tests are valid per se. Okay,
are valid of what? Of potential, of potential.
of potential's the right word to start with, of potential. Somebody with
I don't agree.
What if, for example, like someone with a really high IQ has really terrible social intelligence, so to the point that they like alienate everyone around them, and they cannot climb the success ladder because they're so bad at social intelligence.
All right. Well, we're not talking about particular people. Okay. Let me just get this point out, because IQ tests have been around a long time. So the data suggests that it's accurate as a sense of intelligence. Okay. It's not, the example given is on an IQ test, they use the word regatta. A regatta is a boat race, right?
It's cheese, regatta.
Right. No, not that. That's Italians don't use that word. Come on. Sorry. That's American Italian.
Yeah, the Napolitan, my relatives.
Oh, mine are Northern. So that they do what they claim to do. Okay. That someone who scores 30 points higher than me is going to do better on math and better on spatial recognition and all of those aspects of what we would call intelligence. Okay, so it is not biased towards race or anything like that. This is a global thing.
Wait, it is biased towards race?
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
Asians do better than white people, and white people do better than black people. So it is.
No, but that doesn't mean the test is biased.
Oh no, not the test. I mean the result.
No. So what they found out is that it's a valid measure of intelligence. Okay.
Of current intelligence or of potential intelligence.
Oh, I lost you guys for a minute there. Sorry.
It's a valid measure of intelligence, and that someone can go look up what they mean by that. I think we all understand. Read this passage. These set of numbers.
No, I know. I'm not asking what.
Okay.
I'm asking if.
Okay. So, and it's also predictive in outcomes in the future. Okay, as far as attainments in life. Okay. Now, there seems to be very little pushback on that. Now, what they found is
but is intelligence correlated with like discipline? Because that seems like a more important factor for determining.
Well, we lost him.
Well, it's not. Here he's coming back. It's not an issue of. It's not an issue.
I lost my connection again.
It's okay. It's not an issue of discipline. Okay, because no matter how disciplined I am, or you are, or any of us are, no matter how hard we study, we're not going to get those numbers to budge. You can't study and improve your IQ score.
So I don't agree with that.
Well, go look it up.
Okay, but there's also like neuroplasticity, right? So you can you can learn new skills and you can learn new information, obviously, regardless of your IQ, and you can be seen as smarter as a result of that. There's a genetic component, but there's an environmental component too, even if it's a small one. Yeah, as Sam Harris acknowledges, right?
Murray's view is that it's at least 50% heritable. Okay, so of course environment plays a role, but we're just so what they found is, listen, for the most part, you're born with the brain you're born with. It's like your height. Okay, your height is determined by your environment as well. If you don't get the proper diet, you're not going to grow. Okay, so there are environmental issues, but again, you know, the person who's born with a high IQ, there's no amount of studying, there's no amount of putting my nose to the grindstone that is ever going to make me as intelligent as someone with 130 IQ. So it is measuring something real, and we can talk about, does that mean a good life and all that? Those are all separate questions, right? I mean, you can have 150 IQ and be bipolar and be so medicated and have a miserable life. So let's put that aside for a second. So that what the numbers seem to say is that self-identified blacks are 1 standard deviation below self-identified whites, and self-identified Asians are 1 standard deviation above whites. Okay, so
okay, but like measuring things in terms of like self-identified whites and self-identified blacks, for example, there's so many different ways to interpret those labels that it's almost like useless to do so.
Okay, but do you understand now why I said let's just say that the data is true for the purposes of this conversation, so we can get because there's only one question that matters, and that is that if the data is true, why not separate the kids who are smart from the kids who are dumb when they're young?
Well, that does happen. When you say when they're young, I mean when you're young, some kids go to Harvard on a free ride, and some kids don't finish high school.
Maybe, but we don't put them in different classes and say, well, let's teach these kids.
No, there's AP classes and so on.
Because
are you making the sorry, go ahead.
Well, the leftist idea is that somebody, who's born with ignorant parents, who had ignorant parents before them, can rise above and become an intelligent person. And the idea that, like, their IQ will never be high because they're just dumb genetically, I just don't buy it.
Well,
I think that the piece of that I agree with personally is that I think that regardless of what someone's IQ is as a child, like it probably would benefit society as a whole if everyone as children are given like this sounds like really hippie-ish and maybe leftist too, but like if every child is given like as much hope and encouragement as possible and not like less encouragement because they were genetically fucked more than someone else. You know what I mean?
Right. We of course we all want opportunity for everybody. I mean, so and again, let's get back to that's a large portion of the science. But the reason Sam did that podcast and he questioned whether or not he should do it because it's such a tenditious subject matter.
No, he admitted he shouldn't have done it too.
Well, yeah, but so he read his book and he went through the footnotes and he went through the science backing it up. And what he has a problem.
You're talking about the one with Charles Murray?
The bell curve.
Bell curve. And what he came away with was whatever you want to say about this data, and this book, what you can't say is this wasn't a scrupulously edited and researched book that conveyed the science as it is now. Okay? So, and I take him at his word for that. I have no doubt that this is true. I mean, there's variation in between groups. Okay? That's the shocking thing would be if there wasn't variation within groups, right? There's variation between groups of animals, whatever animals we're talking about. So it doesn't
individual variation always greater than group variation.
Well, that's what it is, dude. That's what they said it 10 times. The reason you would not always hire the Asian if you're interviewing 3 candidates of 3 different races is because individual variation is far greater than 1 standard deviation or even 2 standard deviations from the mean. So someone who's paying attention realizes that this says nothing about the next person walking through the door. I do understand how so I want to get back to, so the reason he did this was because he doesn't like the idea, and I don't either, that there's forbidden knowledge, that there's stuff you just shouldn't talk about, even though we know it's true. That strikes a lot of people, me being one of them, as being a very dangerous thing when we ignore reality and hope it, just pretend it isn't there. We get punched in the face. So I don't like the idea. I agree
with the idea of forbidden knowledge being fucking stupid for sure.
Well, all right. So, I mean, so, you know, and to have somebody on the podcast who said, listen, I read the book and the science that he footnotes on all of this is legitimately done science as far as he could tell. Okay. And that basically no one disputes these findings for the most part. Okay. That guy should not have been rushed off the stage in Connecticut. Where was it? Trying to remember the name of the university where he was speaking, and the woman who was going to ask him questions, probing questions, who was not for his thesis, got hit in the head, and is, you know, like, this is so his problem. The reason he had him on was precisely because this is such a loaded subject matter. That does not mean he's I mean, you should see Twitter. I mean, these people don't know Sam's views, but 2 out of 3 people who talk about him, you know, it seems like he's a racist and he groups them together. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely absurd.
It's really fucking stupid and like intellectually lazy to just call Sam Harris and maybe even Charles Murray racist. Although, like, Ezra Klein brought up some points that sounded interesting, but I honestly didn't pursue it all, so I don't know how true they are or not on that podcast between the two of them.
What he said was that Charles Murray's book, After the Bell Curve, had a chapter in it about how that we should take this knowledge about how black people are genetically inferior and apply it to public schools.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah. So can I?
Well, I heard you.
Yeah, go ahead.
But no, I didn't. I don't remember that.
No,
he's a conservative who works for a conservative think tank. So I'm betting that if I had to listen to an hour of him talking about the prescriptions for society, I'd probably disagree with, you know, 8 out of 10 of them.
Quite. But do you think it matters when he writes a book about how black people are genetically inferior that he spends the rest of his life trying to make things worse for poor black people?
Well, to me, it's 2 separate issues, right? There's the science, which again, I would say seems irrefutable at this point. That intelligence is at least heritable.
Maybe you know more about this than me, but wasn't Ezra Klein talking about how there's perhaps more doubt about that science than Charles Murray and Sam Harris claim?
Very much so. But again, I truly don't know about that science. I've never looked at it, so I don't want. But it is absolutely disputed. And to say that it's completely sound is just not true. It's highly disputed.
It's disputed by some, but again,
I don't know.
None of us. I don't know. I'm not familiar with it either. But if people like Ezra Klein didn't know either, right? He wasn't citing specific studies that refute that. He may have a little, actually, but the point is discussing these. I mean, if Sam had a Holocaust denier on, is he then a Jew hater? I mean, of course he is.
But that's absurd.
No, of course not.
Listen, all 3 of us don't need to have the social justice warrior talk. Like, we all know there's lunatics on both sides, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue. That Sam's point is the same point in the Ezra Klein thing, is that this research is being done on genetics and so on. This research is being done, and certain things are going to come to light that are going to be unpleasant when you start looking at our genomes. And the example he used was Neanderthals, where you have to be Caucasian to have Neanderthal DNA. People who are direct African lineage don't have it. And, you know, there were these jokey articles about Neanderthals, and his point was, imagine if that ran the other way, that black people had Neanderthal blood. Just imagine the white supremacists of the world would be using this as justification for bigotry. Okay, here's the point. These truths, these facts about our genetic backstory are going to come out. We're going to be confronted with this information, even when they're doing research on something that may be unrelated to this, and that has no political no social angle to it at all. And certain people are going to grasp onto it. And the only way for us to deal with that is to talk about it and say, yep, here's what it says. However, here's what it also says. And this has nothing to do. I mean, we have a constitution, etc. I mean, I listen to Charles Murray, whatever. That he's going to turn me into a bigot? No, it's not going to happen. Okay? It doesn't matter what those findings are, because the next person that walks through the door is one person. It has nothing to do with groups. Okay? So
people like the three of us don't need to worry about that kind of shit, like getting turned into white supremacists because of Charles Murray, because we understand the idea of critical thinking. But there are a lot of dumb people out there, which I'm not saying at all is a reason that science like that should be suppressed. I think
but it's
that
not
science
dumb.
like that
It's rational, and that's the problem. Testing kids at a young age, saying this kid's smart and this kid's dumb, and oh, by the way, a lot of the dumb kids happen to be black because they were raised in shitty environments and they're poor, so they happen to have lower IQs. But
that may not be true though.
No, it's you just told me it was statistically true for a half hour.
No. Yeah, but you just said because they were born in a poor place.
No, I'm saying more black kids are going to be in the shallow pool than the deep pool, no?
But it's not because of where they were born. That would be Murray's contention.
It's not. Poor people don't do worse on IQ tests.
No. It's not parceled by how much money you have. It's parceled by what genetics you have. That's his point. It's at least.
I think D means like socioeconomic status or class differences. Is that what you mean, D?
No, I don't think this is becoming a question over what IQ is. I think and
IQ
it's the crux. No, the idea that you can test somebody when they're 6 and go, oh, this kid's gonna be dumb. I think that's absurd. I mean.
But it might be true, right? I mean,
a person's environment has everything to do with their intelligence. Everything to do with their intelligence. I would say 90%.
Well, no one believes that.
I do.
All right, you can believe whatever you want.
I grew up. The reason you think the reason I am intellectually curious and read books is because of my genetics. Somehow that's what. No, it's because my dad's a Jungian psychologist, and I grew up listening to Joseph Campbell tapes and going to church, but I had atheist parents. I mean, come on, like this is what shaped me. The idea that like I wasn't smart when I was in first grade. I wasn't any brighter than any other kid when I was young. I didn't even get good grades when
grades are not IQ. I mean, this is you have to.
Well, what is IQ?
I didn't do well in school either, and I didn't get interested in learning until after school.
But again, if they tested your IQ accurately when you were 12, and they tested it tomorrow, it would be the same. Or okay,
I don't think that's true, and I don't think you understand IQ.
I don't think. I'm not sure that mine would be like when I was in elementary school. I was diagnosed with learning disabilities, and apparently the symptoms of them disappeared. So I took an IQ test when I was younger. And I mean, it's only like one time, so it's a small sample size. But then I took them years later, and my IQ seemed to have gone up. It might not have, but maybe it's just that environment played a role. You know what I mean?
Stable throughout lifetimes. Look it up. Doesn't mean you're not more learned.
No, I've even heard people who do IQ tests say that it can go up or down by one or two points or something throughout your life.
All right, 1 or 2 points. Right, 1 or 2 points. That's not a lot, right?
Yeah, but it's just.
This is the thing about this. Is what I want to say about IQ tests. They're not perfect, but even Jordan Peterson, you can Google, look on YouTube when he talks about IQ, and even he will concede that they measure something real, okay, and they do what they say they do. Their claims are true. The claim about the validity of IQ tests is not in doubt, okay? That doesn't mean how intellectually curious you are, what quality of life.
I think there's doubt about how useful that is.
Can I read a
That's
quick
a separate conversation.
Can I read a quote from Hitchens about IQ? As a young anthropologist conducting intense field studies in the controlled conditions of a male bonding and territorial boarding school, I made an observation that is only now being recognized as a contribution to primary research. There is and always has been an unusually high and consistent correlation between the stupidity of a given person and that person's propensity to be impressed by the measurement of IQ.
I just read that recently too. The IQ test, right? I think we all understand that the IQ test is not a quality of human being test, right? I mean, that's not what it is.
But we didn't say that.
Well,
whatever. From this, but.
So anyway, Murray would say it's at least 50%, more like 75% heritable, and to me that sounds reasonable because there were kids in school.
I think I would say it's more like 50. Like, I'm not a scientist either, but I've heard convincing arguments on both sides of this issue, and it seems like there's a lot of evidence to suggest that environment plays a very large role too. So I don't know. I mean, like, as usual, I'm kind of on the fence with this. I'd say it's more like 50-50, but I could be swayed one way or the other.
The point is people should be able to discuss these matters, and the social liability of discussing science. I know it's problematic, okay, but we cannot shut the debate down. And that's where Sam Harris lives, right? So, and the example he used in
we're talking about it right now.
The Ezra Klein debate, he talked about what if somebody was doing research on hoarding, and so Sam Harris is half Jewish, and they find out that Jews have a much higher incidence of this gene, the hoarding gene. In other words, genetically proving that Jews are cheap, all right, to put it bluntly. Okay? This kind of thing is around the corner, okay? This is that kind of that type of information, not that specific information, is coming, okay? And what's going to happen when to use his example, something like that comes out? The Jew haters of the world are going to key on that and say, look, here is evidence that Jews are the cheapest motherfuckers out there. Here it is, the gene ABC123. They have it at 90% frequency, where the population only has it at 30%, the wider population, and so on. The point is, this information the point is not to ignore that, not to call anybody who discusses it an anti-Semite, etc. It's if they're being anti-Semitic.
At least a little bit telling that somebody is venturing into those kind of.
And I agree with your point. Like, one of the problem. What?
Sorry,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it just is.
No. You bring up. Dee brings up the toughest question of all. Is but don't you start to question the motives of people who, like a Charles Murray, who are doing this research and writing these books? And the honest answer, of course, is yes, I do. And
also,
that's so, dude, that's so honest.
Also, like, in terms of genetic, I think genetics is more complicated than that. Like, you can't necessarily say this one gene is associated with this one particular behavior. Like, it's usually more than one different gene. And when you say a gene is associated with a particular behavior, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was evolutionarily designed for that particular behavior. So you don't really know the downstream biological effects that could result.
Yes, that's true. Genes show themselves in different ways over time. So, like Dawkins has talked about this, a specific gene a million years ago could be for spots on a lion, or on a not on a lion, um, on a cheetah, and then a million years later, that gene is emerging, doing something completely different. So that's why all of this stuff needs to be. It's part of a much larger conversation, and the science itself is in its infancy. So,
but then what we just hit on, wasn't that the real crux of it? In other words, how do you say, and I think this is what people have trouble with, how do you articulate questioning somebody's motives like you just articulated so well, with saying Charles Murray's a racist? Right? That's what people do. They're thinking about his motives and
yeah,
can't articulate it, so they say he's a racist. But
I mean, I would say that the probability that Charles Murray is a racist is much higher than the average population.
right. And even if you don't want to say that, you could definitely say that his motivations skew that way, and that there's a reason he's looking into these IQ things, especially when he happens to be the type of political person, he leans politically in the direction of deregulation.
I think we can probably all agree motivations.
Yeah, but I mean, he leans towards.
He's a conservative.
Those ideas, that's the crux of the problem. You can say, I agree with you that like these ideas shouldn't be taboo, but Charles Murray's ideas have been out for 30 years, and like the reason he's controversial is like not just because of his views, but because of everything else he does. And it's like Hitchens said, and I love this quote. It's my favorite Hitchens quote. He's like, it's not just what you think, but and what you know, but it's how you know it. It's the construction of knowledge that's important, as well as what you know.
It's what you do with the knowledge, right?
That's
and,
a
yeah, and
yeah.
And,
this is why, like, Ed, when you and I talk about subjects like morality, I always talk about pragmatism. Like, how useful is it to think one thing? That's a good segue into actually the other thing that we were going to talk about, which is the whole Israel-Palestine situation, which I think is one of the first things that got you guys each other on Twitter, right?
Was it? I don't even remember.
No, I mean, I've seen.
No, but you guys do have different opinions about that, though, right?
He's trying to start some shit here, D.
I'm very reasonable on this. I'm not.
Well, I think we just came to.
No, listen, I'll go first. I mean, I have serious problems with Israel. Certainly the current government, and but conceptually, I mean, to me, it's like I don't know if this is a good analogy, but my first instinct, would be to trust more of what's coming out of Israel than it is on the other side. Generally speaking.
When you say the other side, I kind of understand that, because oftentimes that's like Hamas, and it's not necessarily the Palestinian people who are talking.
Right. I mean, again, I'm characterizing the government of Palestine, not the person. It's a really unfortunate situation, but Israel's imagine living in an environment where you're surrounded by people who are literally sworn enemies, that it says in their constitution that part of their, I mean, you think about the American Constitution and you think about their Constitution, that, turn it into a lake of fire. I mean, that is a weird way to live, to be surrounded like that, and to have a democracy. I mean, it's a religious state. That's the biggest problem I have with it. I don't see that changing really. But to compare it,
sorry, what do you think about John Kerry's famous quote when he said that you can be a religious state or a democracy, not both?
I didn't know he said that. But well, you can be no, you could be a you could be both. I mean, why couldn't you be both? You could vote to have a religious government, which is what they have. They call it your state. I mean, it is not, their constitution does not read like the U.S. Constitution. That's for sure.
No, but the reason, I mean, I'm just going to be blunt. The reason that they keep people out, and the reason that the protest is called the right of return, is that the object is to maintain a Jewish majority in Israel.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah.
And because of that, it's difficult to call it a democracy. Now, you can make the argument, and I wouldn't necessarily, it's a strong argument, that many, put it this way, many people on the right are motivated the same way to keep Mexicans out of this country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least theoretically, the people of Israel could vote and open their borders, right? I mean, that could.
And then what? Have the Palestinians come in? They have a much higher birth rate, and in 10 years, it's no longer a Jewish majority.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, well, that's why I'm an atheist and I hate all this stuff.
Well, that's the problem with defending the religious democracy.
Well, I'm not defending the religious democracy. I'm defending democracy vis-a-vis the governments that they're surrounded by. It's the only democracy in the Middle East, and it's a really tough problem. I mean, they can't let all those people repatriate. I mean, all you have to do is think about your own country, and the prospect of open borders, and nobody would, almost no one would be for that. I mean,
how long do you think they're gonna, I mean, just what are they gonna do? Just keep pushing into? I mean, they opened up 2,500 new settlements this week in the West Bank, in the midst of this protest.
Yeah, that's not a good idea. I would be against that. That's just exacerbating a problem. I mean, I try to put myself in their shoes. They're surrounded by sworn enemies. They're outnumbered hugely. There isn't moral parity there. I mean, it's not even close to me, as far as I'm concerned. So, and I do want Israel to exist, not just because people I know and love are Jewish, but I mean, in the wake of World War II and all the rest of it, I mean, this is where we are. I mean,
But I just don't understand. Like, how can you, how can anyone really justify like keeping your neighbors in like an open air prison where you don't have access to the water and all this nonsense because there's violent extremists? Like, it's very tough for me to bridge that gap. As much as I do understand.
But I mean, aren't most people in that part of the world not doing all that well? I mean, are things so wonderful in Lebanon and Jordan and Syria? What's that?
We're all dying in the Sylvia Plath sense of the word, right?
Yeah. So, I just don't. Until I get hard information otherwise, I'm on Israel's side. I think that war that they had for a few weeks about 4 years ago, where they were, they went a little too far. But again, imagine if someone was bombing one of our cities.
But what's the solution? It's okay, because if you're saying I'm gonna stand with Israel until I hear otherwise, what it really is I'm gonna stand with Israel until they acquire the entire West Bank and Gaza and push the Palestinians into the ocean or whatever, into the desert, right? I mean, it's either that or it's a one-state solution. There's no other option on the table.
I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to say I don't know how to
Fair
solve.
answer, man.
I don't even have a good. I mean, the only intuition I have is that until, I'll quote Hitchens. Why isn't this problem being solved? There's only one reason this problem isn't being solved, because the parties of God have veto power. And once the parties of God have veto power, it's an unsolvable problem.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Ed. I was going to ask you about what role you think religion plays in this.
Yeah, it's
a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you could even say that religion is just the badge, they're not necessarily arguing about specific quotes in holy books. That's not really what's going on there, right? It's a tribalism to the extreme, and
so is it more like the tribal nature of their cultures, perhaps, that lead them to these more ideological interpretations of their religion, and that also connects to the history of the struggle over this geographical area?
I think they're quite beholden to their holy books, and both parties are, right?
Indeed.
One's a Jewish state, and the others, their governments are entirely, I mean, nearly entirely get their laws and their culture and the way they live ad nauseum from their religion. And once the difference is religion, how do you reconcile? If Islam is true, Judaism has to be false, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. There is the only way you reconcile the two is if you just move on and don't look at the details, right? I mean, this is the whole problem. So until they become secular, this is unsolvable. I mean, I don't see.
Wouldn't it be easier to try to get them to have like more moderate interpretations of their religions than to get them to throw out their religions, though?
Yeah. That would be easy. That would be easier to do, sure. But how are you going to do that?
But it also is a small issue of land.
Well,
I mean, it just seems like it's probably easier of that. You know what I mean?
We lost you there, I think. I think he dropped.
Yeah, I mean, look at Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland had these differences, right? But it was really based on, it was a democracy, and certain, the Catholics in Northern Ireland or the Protestants outnumbered the Catholics in Northern Ireland and kept the crown there, and so on. And there's been after a long period of time, there's been a peaceful resolution. I mean, Sinn Féin is now entirely political organization, and so on.
But it wasn't a problem of religion. It was a problem of British rule.
Right, but the British rule was the Anglicans versus the Protestants versus the lines of division were drawn,
indeed,
theologically,
but very, very similar to the Israel occupation. The land.
Neither of these groups of people are going anywhere, and I think that's what everybody has to acknowledge, that the Palestinians aren't going away and the Jews aren't going away, and it's now confronted with that reality. How do we move forward?
I think
I don't have any wisdom. There's no one knows what to do.
I'll throw an example. I'm just going to throw something out there. I think the United States should pressure Israel into a one-state solution.
Meaning, what does that mean exactly?
They get everything, but they have to take the Palestinians in.
When you say they get everything,
how well do you think that'll work?
It'll work wonderfully.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
But the problem is that in 10 years, Israel will lose majority, so they won't accept it. This is the crux of the problem.
Not to mention, who's going to be pouring in is not going to be PhDs and engineers and
no, it's going to be poor people in the desert who weren't able to be PhDs because they've been living in an open air prison since they were born. I mean.
I don't have I mean,
You got to
you'd have to control repatriation somehow, right? I mean, you're not going to, no community, you can't expect any community to say, hey, let's change everything so that literally foreigners, quote unquote, will be running the show entirely that are culturally different than you are. I mean,
but this wasn't imperialism. They took this land when my dad was in grad school.
In what, in the 70s, you mean?
67, I believe.
Oh, the 67 war, yeah.
And I just think people want to muddle the issue because there really is a solution out there, and the solution involves something that the Israelis just won't accept. And I mean, that's
you can understand why would you accept that
a one-state solution? I would, because the other choice is dead Palestinians for another 10 years.
There would have to be border control.
That seems like really like specific, like polar opposite options.
Well, it's what we have now, or a one-state solution where Israel has to deal with the internal problems of having strife with the Palestinian people living among them.
I mean, how are you going to force Israel into a? Let's say there's a one-state solution. Let's say they pull the Trump card and build a wall, right? And say, all right, everybody who's here now, you're citizens of Israel. This is one country now. The borders redrawn, and let's say a third of the people there are culturally Palestinian, so that they couldn't take over the whole place, but they'd have representation in the Knesset, if that's what it's called, and so on. These people would have to fucking surrender their claims of destroying Israel.
They do.
Wiping out.
They do. There's Palestinians right now.
But the Hamas runs the Palestine. The PLO. These people are fucking.
Dude, you know how many Palestinians live in Israel? There's Palestinians who vote in the Knesset. They're living there. It's not a completely Jewish state.
So
they didn't ethnically cleanse the place.
So there are elected officials who are Muslim in Israel. I don't even know.
At least Palestinian, for sure.
Well, are they Palestinian Christians or Palestinian?
Are they Palestinian Jews?
I mean, you have to understand the bloodlines are so mixed that like Palestinians are closer to Israelis than Israelis are to like Ashkenazi Jews.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, so there's a race that they share, but maybe not a religion, you know. But my point is that like there's Palestinians living in Israel
like, now. They're all Arabs, right?
So yes, like they would have to like say that we're not going to bomb Israel, yeah, for sure, and live by the same rules as everybody else, and but
right. I mean, that's a tall order based on. I mean, if you go on liveleak.com, you can watch 50 videos of old ladies whipping knives out at border crossing, trying to stab the odd Israeli soldier. I mean, these, and again, this isn't all the people. Of course it isn't. The point is,
my girlfriend's family's from the West Bank, and they all live here. So, I mean, there's some good people over there, no?
There's no doubt.
Who's saying that they're all bad people?
No, but like you're saying that like they couldn't assimilate.
I mean, just imagine the cynicism involved if you're on the Israeli side. I mean, just imagine.
I see that, and that's the biggest problem with this whole thing is that you go and interview young people on either side of that fence, and they're radicalized. And they hate the other group and see them as like animals, and I've seen it on like Abby Martin videos. She's walking around interviewing people. I think she showed one on Joe Rogan, And I've seen the same thing on the Palestinian side, you know, anti-Semitic, you know, trashing Jews. Like it's and that's the future. That's not, you know, the people now. They're not getting, I don't think they're getting more compassionate. You know, I think living in that environment and being scared all the time is radicalizing both sides even more.
I mean, what would be helpful is if the Palestinians who have some autonomy, right, the Palestinian Authority, they started voting in people who are moderates and wanted to come to the table. I mean, Clinton, I remember watching it live, had, I guess it was Shimon Peres and Yasser Arafat, that creepy bastard Yasser Arafat, shaking hands on the lawn, and he had them very close to an agreement. I mean, I don't want to, I'm not putting all the blame on one side for sure. I'm not one of those. I'm not Shapiro.
No, you seem very rational about it.
Do you know why? Until they give up the fact, until Jews give up the fact that they think that, to quote Sam Harris, the creator of the universe promised them a stretch of desert on the Mediterranean. This is in his capacity as an omniscient real estate broker, is his joke.
Yeah.
Okay. Until they give up that idea that somehow God, we got this because the deed is in the Bible, they have to give that up. And the Palestinians have to give up similar claims.
Exactly.
How is that going to happen? How are they going to give up those claims?
It will. It will. I'm of the mind that those things will fade. But this situation right here is not going to help it. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I was fascinated to watch the press, and I don't know what the literal truth is to what took place there, but you know, I side with Israel. I mean, in a sense, if I had to pick sides, you have 50
you
out
don't
of the.
Always have to pick sides, though.
I'm trying to put myself in an uncomfortable position and say, if my border was being overrun by people swearing to do us in, you know, I'm not the Dalai Lama when it comes to stuff like that. You know, I mean, I can understand the reaction.
Yeah. It's tough, man, for sure. But I think the common ground is the fact that the religion has to go. The stake to the land on religious claims has to go out the window, or else it's not going to be fixed.
Yeah, I mean, nobody should feel like they're promised anything, but you know, we're not going to solve this problem. I mean, if you spend,
you know, I will say one thing on a political note. Jimmy Carter negotiated for like months or something, right, at Camp David,
with Sadat,
to get the Sinai Peninsula back, I believe it was.
Right.
Yeah, and
after Egypt lost it in that brief war.
Yes, and so it got to, I mean, you know, they were trying all kinds of things, bringing it to the table and trying to make concessions about settlers and all this stuff. And in the end, Jimmy Carter had to get up and say, "Hey, listen, you have to either let this go, or we're going to cut off funding to Israel." And that's why that land was given back. So there's a big part of this.
We don't play hardball with Israel.
But hold on, wait 1 second.
We don't.
There's a big part to do with religion, but there's another giant part, and that is that the conservatives in America fund the occupation.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, there's Christians who love what's going on there because
more religious stuff.
Armageddon will happen when
it's amazing, right? It's just like pervasive.
Yeah, and depressing. And you know, Sadat was murdered over that. You know, basically, if you've ever seen that video, I mean, I remember when it happened. He was on TV a lot, and if you ever watch that video of him being assassinated, it's pretty crazy. During a parade procession.
Yeah.
So these leaders, it's hard to be courageous. I mean, even if there are reformers in Palestine, your fealty to the cause is questioned immediately, and they put a bullet in your head. I mean, that's a really tough environment to make progress in.
For sure.
I don't see. I don't know how it's going to. I don't know. I don't see how it could improve. I really don't. But I remember what's his name, Pat Buchanan was called an anti-Semite because he said the reason Israel, in so many words, the reason Israel gets away with so much of because it's Amen Corner in Congress, and
really, that was taboo.
in the 80s. And there's some truth in that. I mean, it's just like you come out against Israel in America, you've got a major fucking problem politically.
For sure.
Right? Yeah. And that's a problem. They have nukes that we gave them and all, and no one else has them. We don't let other people, other states, if some other state was handing nukes out to a small country, we would take serious issue with that. So I mean, I don't know. I don't see it getting solved anytime soon. Certainly, I hope in my lifetime, but I can't imagine it. I just can't. There's too much animosity.
Yeah, I think that's a really nuanced take, and I'm glad that we came to that.
Well, my dad was My dad was basically an atheist, although he was a Unitarian, which is as close to being an admitted atheist as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
Familiar with Unitarians? They have no creed or anything. It's just the pageantry of like going to church, but there's no.
Wasn't there an old joke about they had like a burning question mark or something?
That's funny. That's good. It's all into. To me, it's all lapsed Jews and Catholics who like the idea of all that stuff, but don't want any dogma. They just want the gathering and the chatting and the rubbing elbows, which is great.
That's a major appeal of religion, right?
Yeah. The Unitarianism. Too bad that can't spread like wildfire because everybody'd be home reading books and getting into arguments about the book club instead of shooting at each other.
Sounds like
that's what we do instead.
Thank God for the internet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But so we got anything else on the agenda that we didn't talk about?
I can't think of anything. Did you guys think of anything else that we missed that's relevant to all these issues?
I think we really hit the important parts. I really wanted to touch on Peterson and his whole controversy. It's so funny because I talk about Peterson so much.
Did you see that?
Sick of it, but he's so relevant, man.
He's so overexposed. I mean, this guy is. Well, and again, I find it interesting that in principle, I come to his defense, right? Again, it's a free speech issue, and the fact that people want to. I mean, did you see this Michael Eric Dyson, whatever his name is? I'm not getting.
I actually watched that debate last night. Did you guys watch that?
Oh yeah,
yet?
the monk debate.
Yeah, the monk.
I agreed with Stephen Fry far more than anyone else, and I agreed with what's that chick's name? Michelle Goldberg and Jordan Peterson a little bit, but mostly I found everyone other than Stephen Fry to be kind of annoying, to be honest.
I only saw the part where Dyson called him an angry white man. I only saw that blur, but I want to see because I've seen
triggered.
What?
You got so triggered.
Oh my God! How inappropriate! Is
I'll tell you one thing. There was a very tense moment, and I think Peterson got a little bailed out, to be honest with you, by the moderator, where he brought up Dyson was his name. He brought up Charles Murray, and he brought up the exact issue that I'm talking about right now. And Peterson looked at him and went, "Well, we're not talking about that right now." And then the moderator bailed him out.
But I think that was because he didn't want to get into a really fucking controversial issue, though.
Yeah, but that is the crux of the issue. That's the problem with the ideology. The super classical liberal, you know, government assistance bad. Like that, it's all individuality. It's all wonderful, but that old Buchanan stuff and the connection between libertarianism. Like it's all so very difficult because it bridges a gap between like the intellectual world and the political world.
The question for him is, considering that we're being confronted by this science, and if you assume all scientists aren't bigoted and they're not doing this because they're mustache twirling evil men in back rooms that have a secret agenda, if that's
and
true,
shape-shifting lizard people too.
Yeah. I mean, since we live in this world with this kind of information, how are we to proceed? With personal attacks and so on, or do we make clear that this information is out there and it's up to us to understand that the world is a lot more complicated than a narrow bit of statistics? I mean, those are the conversations that need to be had in the right way.
That's why we're having these conversations.
Yeah, and
but it's a much better conversation because the three of us are coming from good places.
See, I used to work. I just reminded. I used to work with a woman when I first started working. African American, attractive woman. Trying to think of her name. Not that I would say it, but it's 25 odd years ago, and this is when crack was running wild in New York City and presumably a lot of other places. So early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And she said to me one day that crack was created by the government to get it into those neighborhoods like the one she's from and to fuck with them, in so many words. And I remember exactly what I said back then. I said, if you find proof of that, evidence of that, I will march with you fucking down Fifth Avenue calling for the heads of these people. Let's find the evidence. If that's true, that's not any country I want to be living in. Let's find out. So, you know, these brash claims, you know, we need evidence. And,
well, I'll give you one.
I mean,
it's not that crazy, but what about Nixon got caught saying that he wanted to intentionally increase the penalties for, specifically for marijuana and heroin, to suppress the black and hippie vote.
Well, he was Tricky Dicky. He was an evil genius. Have you listened to any of his tapes?
Yeah.
I heard the ones on. Did you guys watch that Ken Burns Vietnam War documentary? I heard all of the ones that were on there.
Yeah, I did watch that. It's pretty good. What's interesting is every time a Jew comes up, Nixon's like, "Oh, he's a Jew. Oh, he's a Jew. Oh, he's a Jew." What a shock! But you know, like at least what I jokingly say about Nixon, like at least he was an evil genius. Like Trump is just fucking stupid and evil.
Yeah, I know. He's an evil idiot.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what's more dangerous. I don't know. We can have an argument.
I don't even think he's.
I think he's just a selfish idiot, which might be a small difference between that and evil. But I don't know.
You're 100% right. It's not even his evil. It's just that he's just greedy and stupid.
You see that letter now that the talks broke down?
Oh my god! And word is,
so give me a jingle if you change your mind. Like he's calling up some broad for a fucking date.
Somebody said it was like kindergarten. It was like, "Do you like me?" Circle yes or no.
Everybody takes his cows.
Oh man!
But I tell you what, I don't criticize when he says that he's an honorable guy, and Twitter lights up like, how dare he call this guy honorable? He's one of the least honorable, and he is one of the most. I mean, the guy is the head of a cargo cult of keeping millions of people hostage and starving. I mean, he's pure evil, right? But you know, as diplomatically, that might be appealing to him like that might get him to the table. Who knows? Like those kind of weird things that he does. I say,
yeah. I mean, listen, but
what do you guys think of like Scott Adams style arguments that he's kind of like more Machiavellian than a lot of people think.
I think that's ridiculous.
I follow him on Twitter, and I have to, and he's the biggest following person who's responded to a tweet of mine. He has 250,000 followers, and he responded to, and I'm critical, but I say, you know, something like serious question, da da da, and one time he responded, and one time someone responded to my question, and then he responded to that, the two of us, and so I feel like I'm special now because somebody with a big Twitter following acknowledged me. I'm being only half serious, but I don't know. He comes off as a little like he treats this all as a game, like that, you know, like he's an evil genius, and you guys are missing it. Yeah, he comes off as the stupidest, most selfish, ungraceful person who ever lived, but. Look at I predicted this. This would happen and that would happen, and he's treating it like it's a Mets versus Yankees dispute in a bar. You know, who had the best team, the '86 Mets or the? And I don't know. I follow him because he's an intelligent guy, and I want to see people. You know, if you can make a persuasive argument pro Trump. I want to hear it, and I'm not persuaded. However, there are times when he calls out, look at this news story, guaranteed to be fake news, like when he called MS-13 animals, but the press ran with that he called immigrants animals, and they all backed off in a day, and he predicted it. So, I mean, there's some value in listening to what he has to say, but I think
and like how the news made it seem that he was supporting white supremacists when he said there are good people on both sides.
Yeah, like of course there are. Hey, that's a contentious issue we should talk about. The Confederate flag. Now, this is very interesting to me because forcing people, and someone on Sam's podcast came up with a great idea. How about remaking the Confederate flag, putting another symbol like in the corner, whatever, like a diamond, a picture of a diamond shape. I'm just making this up. And what that means is I'm all for the Confederacy, but that whole slavery thing I know was wrong. In other words, I'm into the honor culture of our past, but I'm acknowledging that the part that where we own people and treated them like farm equipment isn't that part. I understand that.
That sounds like a great fucking idea.
And Sam said that is a great idea, and I can't believe it hasn't been done. I think I have a serious problem, and again, I have a serious problem with the South's attitude and their past on this subject, obviously. But forcing all those people to remove their symbol like that, I mean, people are very. They don't want to give up their cultural signifiers so easily, and they've gone very far very quickly in doing so. And I think they should be lauded for that. And somebody should really spread a meme where it's the same flag except on one corner, or you know how it's divided by the stars in one of those quadrants. Change the color. And it's just an acknowledgement that, hey, this is about everything else other than that. And you solve the problem instead of forcing people out of there. I mean, you can't get, I mean, how many people in this country believe in a flying Jewish carpenter? Okay. They're not going to give that up. I'm not okay.
I actually have a flying Jewish carpenter. He's coming by later to do something.
Oh, what's he going to do for you?
Nothing.
Is he going to teach you how to fly?
Of course. What else would he do?
So I just think
boring like carpentry.
I could so easily envision being down there and saying, "I'm not giving this fucking flag up. I'm not."
What's going on with the guns right now? That's what's happening. It's the same thing. They feel like they're losing their culture. It's you know.
That's another problem we're never going to solve. I mean,
yeah.
How many guns are on the ground? I'm a gun owner. I've basically given them away. I don't know that I'll own them anymore going forward, but I own them for 20 years. Long guns, not handguns. I got no interest in handguns. And they're the biggest problem, of course. But, you know, these school shootings, these people who go after this guy Hogg, who,
the
voice of the shooters, Parkland, if that's what it's called. I mean, I'm fascinated that anybody would like, oh, dude, he's talking about school shootings, for God's sakes. What the? We can't get behind this.
It's not just like idiots and like crazy, you know, right wing talking. I mean, these are like.
It's not just Laura Ingraham who should have.
It's people. Yeah, it's people who are supposedly respectable who are saying these things. Pretty horrendous.
Well, the disingenuousness of the so-called NRA, that it's video games, like video games don't exist in other countries, or it's mental health, like mental health rates aren't stable across national lines. I mean, we're being lied to.
Too many doors this week. It was too many doors.
Oh, yeah, that's it. Too many doors. Right. So then we'll have them all die in fires instead. But there's some psychological thing going on there, man. That, I mean, you never heard when I was growing up. I mean, I speak like I'm old. You didn't hear about school shootings. Have been around. I mean, they happened in the 1920s and stuff. But since that one out in Colorado, what's it called? The most famous one, Columbine.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, it's so, I have a child, so it's like, I asked my son who's in second grade if they taught him about it. What if like a bad man comes there and this kind of, oh yeah, you're taught to run or hide under your desk. And I'm like, hide under your desk? I didn't say this to him, but I'm like, dude, if somebody shows up with a gun at my kid's school, it's a fucking bloodbath. I mean, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. What do you hide? I mean, it sounds like it's the old Cold War thing, you know, when the bomb comes, you got to hide under your desk, you know.
Yeah, put your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. And what else do you do though? It's horrible, man.
That reminds me of Fight Club. How they talk about how they dose people with gas on airplanes and then they tell them to put their heads between their legs.
I never saw Fight Club.
Oh, dude, you're missing out.
Dude, it's like one of the best movies ever.
But wasn't it that
the book is even better too?
I read that too.
Yeah, I love Chuck Palahniuk.
Dude, that's one you gotta watch. It really is solid, start to finish.
I like Brad Pitt, I have to say. I think he's a good actor. I think he's totally cool.
Dude, it's one of his best movies, man. He's amazing in it. Definitely.
He's the oceans.
Yeah, dude, it's like one giant philosophy lesson too.
Really? I got into a fucking spat on Twitter with these philosophers, trained philosophers, either PhD candidates or getting their masters, and they were taking down Sam Harris. And this guy was being such a dick to me and he was misquoting. I mean, it's amazing to me. Philosophers are just like sports fans. They have their beliefs, and everybody's an asshole who disagrees with them. And I mean, it's just this. You want to call it tribalism? It exists in so many forms. It's really fascinating.
It's so boring, isn't it?
Very well said. Tribalism is everywhere.
You cannot get away from it. And it's just fascinating to see that this guy was saying that Sam's an idiot and this and that. And then, of course, a guy that knows him throws up a direct quote of that guy that sounds like a summary of literally a verbatim summary of the moral landscape, you know, and say, dude, you agree with him. Well, I don't actually agree with him. All right, if we have a 30-hour conversation, you're going to point out on page 72 that you have a difference with him. All right, fine. So what? Okay, but what
you need to get wrapped up in the character and not the ideas for a lot.
That is so true.
And even
but that's
yeah, definitely.
That's what happens when you get famous.
But don't you remember, like, I mean, I remember, you know, years ago, and your ideas are not as developed, and it's easy to fixate. I was even like Hitchens, man. Like my ideas about religion and things have definitely shifted since I was in college and really got into his stuff. And
Yeah, me too, man. I used to be like Ed and I have talked about this many times that I used to be a militant atheist, but mixed mental arts is one of the things that made me not militant about my atheism anymore.
dude, it's good to hear, and I'm glad. Like I made the same journey, and that's I hear that a lot. I don't think it's just us, but it's easy to just fixate on somebody and think all their ideas are wonderful. I happen to the reason I'm so interested in Peterson, besides the stuff we've talked about, is like I have this thing where I disagree with his idea that we should all point towards this puritanical, monogamy where, it's Judeo-Christian root. Like
Right.
I disagree with that whole thing, but like his Bible series is wonderful, and he really builds on like people I like Northrop Frye and
Yeah, I love his biblical lecture series too. If
dude, it's
like I've said
wonderful.
many times, like if I were a Christian, that would be the type of Christian I would try to be.
Yeah, but like, how far has he gone from that, man?
Yeah, he's out of his depths, and he spoke to Matt Dillahunty, which is a good adversary for him because Matt Dillahunty is not educated. He's self-educated on all of this stuff, and he's got a really good bullshit detector. And that's I just think if you boil Peterson down, and you just did die, that D or die.
Whatever.
If you boil it all down,
Hunter's Pug.
and I've had this conversation with a buddy up in Toronto who's a giant fan who saw him speak and met him and everything, is that he's just selling a different version, a watered down version of Christianity. And my view is we're going to go down this road again. There's already 31,000 types of Christianity active in the world today. 30,001 isn't going to solve our problems.
I think he's actually more about Enlightenment values than he is about religion.
I don't know about that.
I'm in the middle of you two because I think he believes his underlying idea is that the Judeo-Christian moral line that goes underneath everything you do is the best way to go in our current society. I think
I think he does think that, but I also think that he believes that he doesn't think that it's necessarily even a good idea for everyone to be Christian, for example. Like he fully accepts people who are not Christian.
Well, you're saying Christian in like the sense of like fundamentalist Christian, right? Like
No, I mean any kind of Christian.
But I do think he still points. He does think everybody should, like, when you, for instance, this is like when you look at his take on gay marriage. Somebody asking about gay marriage in a video, and like I was watching it and analyzing what he said, and I mean, you could be ridiculous and look at that video and go, oh, he hates gay people and blah 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 blah, and I'm sure there's a million tweets that said exactly that. But he wasn't saying he hates gay people. He was very specific in what he said. And he said that he doesn't really believe that marriage should be between two people of the same gender. He thinks that, like, from a biological perspective, it should be male and female. But it's okay, if and here's the important part, if it helps them to become more like straight people.
Really?
Yeah. And what he's saying is that
so he has these puritanical Christian views, of course, right?
He does. Yeah.
But everything needs to fit into that. And like the idea is that like your life will be better if you fit into these individualistic Judeo-Christian paths.
Yeah, but the point that like someone like like my friend Hayden Bruce, who I've talked to on here before, who's a pragmatic Christian, might make, is that this sort of worldview works really well for a lot of people. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem.
I don't necessarily think it actually is a problem, and I think it's why Peterson appeals to so many people. It's just that I don't think it's the only myth.
Yes, conservative values have a lot of appeal to a lot of people, but I'd like to speak to this pragmatic Christian because I'd want to hear his views. I mean, what does that mean?
Dude, I bet the three of us could do a talk sometime. That would be a great talk to have with you and Hayden Bruce. I bet he would do that.
Yeah, because you know, I look at these ideologies as operating systems that have been tried in the past and they don't work. And this idea that let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, yeah, we should. Humanism.
And replace it with what, though?
Yeah, but it depends on like whether we should throw out the baby with the bathwater depends on it. Really gets down to whether you believe in the idea of group selection or not, because whether you believe in group selection or not means whether you believe that religion was evolutionarily selected for, or whether it's an unnecessary byproduct of evolution, right?
It's a bug, not a feature, but it can also be right. I mean, tribalism.
But I kind of am more inclined to believe that it's a feature rather than a bug, and there are a lot of arguments from a lot of different biologists that posit the same thing.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to this group selection thing. I know it's not a popular idea in biology. I mean, it's subscribed by only a scant few. That doesn't make it false, obviously.
Have you read any of those books that I and other people suggested yet by people like David Sloan Wilson and Jonathan Haidt?
Only on Wikipedia.
Okay. If you read books like Jonathan Haidt's books and David Sloan Wilson's books, like David Sloan Wilson's Darwin's Cathedral, and I forget what that Jonathan Haidt one is. Maybe you remember it, D. But then there's also like Behave by Robert Sapolsky, that one that we talked about evolution, and there are a whole bunch of other books too. Like
right.
Yeah.
But if the all right, but
that doesn't mean that they're right and the other side is wrong, though. That's not what I'm saying.
I would rather have Jordan Peterson being a virulent Unitarian. Okay, he first of all has a lot better chance of better outcomes if there was no dogma attached to any of this nonsense and these myth stories and not being able to define what a fact is and this double speak and this. You know, I just don't. I understand his appeal broadly, his conservative views, and he's helped a lot. I'm talking about Peterson now, but these are bad operating systems. We need to move on. Okay,
I think it's just a lot more complicated than that. It depends. Like for me, it depends on how you use the operating systems, because you can still use these operating systems in good ways.
Right. If you you're saying take off the shelf what works. Or the thing is, you're starting. You have to edit the books down to almost nothing.
No,
right?
No, it depends on how you interpret the books, right? Like Ed, you and I have talked before about how, you know, they're the fundamentalist Christians, and then there's someone like the type of Christian that my mom is, who's like the most hippie Christian and has like the hippiest interpretation of Christianity that you can possibly imagine.
Right, but she's selectively ignoring the stuff she disagrees with.
Yeah, but everyone ignores something, though. Like, have you read this book called "The Year of Living Biblically"? I forget what the authors.
I know some people down in Lakewood, New Jersey, right here, about a half hour south, and they are quite strict about their Judaism. They don't fuck around. I'll tell you something.
Yeah, but they're not up for killing. If your daughter's not a virgin on her wedding night, stone her to death on your father's
Yeah,
doorstep.
but like it's
only
impossible
not
for
allowed
everyone
in.
to follow every rule in the Bible. Everyone ignores something.
No, I know.
Okay, but I'm saying
The Hasidic Jews get pretty close, man. Come on.
well,
Yeah,
you
probably,
pick a religion, any religion, and say that there's a subset there that try their best to be as literal as possible. Actually, those are the ones I kind of have respect for. I almost have more.
At least they go all in, right?
Yeah, like I could understand that at least. Oh no, we're going to ignore what God says over here, but let's just not worry about that, and let's just focus on this nice passage over there.
One of the things with that though that I've learned more recently is that like some Christians decide to follow what God says, and then other Christians decide to follow what Jesus says, and then other people pick and choose some of both. You know what I mean?
That's why. But you're just demonstrating why starting off with a new movement with the backstory cannot be a bunch of myths and bullshit with divergent messages.
But why?
Without
Wait, but so here's the question. I think like, can we all agree here, the three of us, that we need a new story?
Yeah, we're all trying to like
the new
evolve
story is
right?
secular humanism, civil rights.
My point is that it doesn't have to be secular, though.
It does if you want to ever move on, because
what about like I told you about like my friend Hayden Bruce, who I've talked to on his podcast, and he's talking on my podcast, and we have more in common than we do differences. Like the only thing we disagree about is the existence of God.
So he's okay with abortion.
Yeah, as far as I know, anyway. I don't think we've actually I don't think we've discussed that, but it would surprise me if he's against abortion, to be honest.
It would
surprise me.
Really?
It would surprise me.
It would surprise me if
my mom's very pro-abortion, like even more than I am too. Although she says pro-life, of course, and I'm not anti-abortion either. But like so is my dad.
Well, that's good.
Well, it depends how fundamental.
How are we going to converge in a global community with a shared morality if the backstory is religious? We're not going to, because people like me are never going to come to the trough. People of other
it's fine if the religious people accept people who are not religious, though. Like if they're not fundamentalists. And
yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's still a minority of Christians that are fundamentalists.
I'm talking about Peterson's theology.
Okay, well, he's not a fundamentalist either, necessarily.
No, but I kind of agree with Sam here that like going down the path, let's just do everything we can to aim towards the 1950s, where everything was the way I wanted it to be. I don't necessarily.
I'm not saying that I want the world to be the way that Jordan Peterson wants it to be. That's not what I'm saying.
But
definitely
clearly,
not.
we need a new story.
I'm just saying that he, for me, he is a valid opinion in a broad spectrum of opinions, and I don't agree with anyone completely about anything.
But he articulates that position the best. That's why he's so fascinating, and he can't be written off, because he delivers and drives home the idea that it's very, very possible that humanity needs a story to underline their existence.
I think that he's right about that.
I think so too.
Like you said, we need a better story.
And I don't think
it's interesting. I want to bring up race because I was in the South. The last time I was in the South about 4 years ago now, and I was hunting wild boar, actually, and the guy who owned the land, the lodge, was a lovely guy, but this guy had tolerance for people of a different color, wasn't the most tolerant guy in the world. I mean, he carried a handgun and went on and on about if anybody gives him any trouble, you know, he was ready to pull that piece. And he told me multiple stories about it. And we were sitting around drinking in the lodge after hunting all day. And, you know, I brought some up to him and I'm like, you know, and I'm from New York, right? So I'm Joe Liberal fucking, he was a lovely guy. We got along swimmingly. I mean, but I was like, it's, you know, but like I'm this northerner, you know, whatever, you know, he sees me in a different, I see him in a certain light and he sees me in a certain light. But I said, you know, it must be, you guys are talking about a backstory and we need a new story and that these myths and I think that's vitally important for the health of a community. And this is why I have a soft place in my heart for blacks in this country. I mean, imagine, like my mother's an Italian, right? She's an Italian born. She came here when she was 2 in 1935. And, you know, that culture permeated my existence, the backstory and the glory of what the Italians were today, not so much, but their backstory and being and knowing in a sense that you're part of that because you know I was the child of someone from Italy and my father had a you know his thing with Ireland and you know he's part Irish and part Jewish and all these, so like there was this interwoven backstory of which I could feel a part of, and the black community has almost none of that, and that to me is like a foundational problem. Like they don't.
Yes.
When I say they, I'm not. You know, I'm not being bigoted here. I'm saying as a
dude, it's the problem with just trashing identity politics and saying we're all just individuals. No, dude, you're an individual with a story behind your people and someone you identify with, and their history is slavery.
We're all individuals and we're all also part of groups, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think this genetic thing where you can send away your DNA, which I bought 3 years ago and still haven't done.
Mine's sitting in the closet. I gotta do that same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you know that I hope more people of color in this country do that and find out that what part of Africa that they were from. First of all, we're all from Africa, right? You just have to trace it back further.
And they all evolved there for like 5 million years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but not like 2 generations back.
Right. And I think that if you're born not knowing that you're part of this, I'll use the word patrimony in the original sense of the word. You know, you have this, your lineage stretches back to the beginning of time in a sense. You know, to not have that growing up, that you're a German American and we kill, you know, whatever, sauerkraut in this house, and or you're Jewish and you do this and that, and they don't have, they largely, that's missing from their story, and I have to feel like that is an unfortunate situation to be in. It really is, and it has to permeate somehow. So
yeah, man. Well put, for real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just how you were raised per se. There's other things operating there.
Yeah, the trouble is, how do you know, how do we as people and not just, you know, as a race or whatever, find some common story? I mean, it doesn't seem to be happening as Americans, I'll tell you that. I mean, we seem to be splintering, you know. It's I from my perspective, and maybe this is just because I'm some quasi-socialist lefty, it just looks like places that are pointing their societies towards community are finding a better ground. And I might be wrong, but it just seems like this super individualistic society that has produced great things is not producing such great things in the way of people interacting with each other.
Social cohesion and all.
Yeah. Well, it's like we were talking about how it's important to be an individual and part of a group, but then also have the groups communicate with each other and not like be in one closed off group that's closed off to another group. You know what I mean?
See, I'd like to think, even though I'm battered by all this stuff every day, like we all are, that things have gotten way better and are continuing to get better on the front of bigotry and exclusion based on race, creed, and color. I mean,
So Trump isn't going to destroy the world?
There's a total intolerance for it now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just today on the New York Post on my Twitter feed, you know, because I got to read the Post, you know, the rag, as my dad used to call it, you know. Some guy here's what makes a news story on Twitter on the New York Post. A picture of a guy in his car yelling out the window like this, that he made an Asian slur. Like, that's a story? That somebody fucking yelled out his car, and the fact that he used a slur because the other guy in the car was Asian. This is what we've come to. That's the level. I don't want to hear about that.
People are focusing on race too much. They think that's
what I'm saying.
That's all that's important on both polar opposite sides of the spectrum.
I mean, there was an article from the New Yorker, you know, liberal rag, if you want to call it that, liberal. That article about the prince there who got married last weekend, and it's about the wife, who's Markle, if that's her name, and her mother. The fact that her mother was in a sea of whiteness, and it's just like, dude, she was welcomed with open arms. Why wouldn't she? You're the one making the issue out of it, and you're the liberal New Yorker. Like, it just didn't. I don't know. It just seems like the left is bigger shit stirrers when there's no shit to stir than the right. Like, they're so anxious.
But the right make it all about race sometimes too. But just the more racist people on the right. But both the left and the right do that a lot, for sure, right?
But I don't want to hear the word white privilege. I want to hear about specific acts of racism that need to be addressed. Of course, systemic racism.
Yeah.
The phrase white privilege, I mean, I don't even understand how.
Well, I'll tell you what it comes with.
It's like saying I'm condemned. I don't want to be called these names.
It's pushback. Yeah, of course. I understand that. But it's pushback against the idea, and this idea is unfortunately pervasive, that we all have the same opportunity and that we can all just, you know, do the same things and start from the same level, and that, you know, we have the same opportunity. We just don't. I mean, and
that's true in genetics. To get back to our previous conversation, it's some people are born smarter than others. Some people are born better looking than others. Some people are born
and this is true whether you look at genetics or environment, right?
Right. It's not an even playing field. I mean, I think they use the phrase equality of outcomes. I don't want equality of outcomes.
Dude,
I mean,
I
want the Giants to be the best football team. You know? Like, I don't want everybody to end with an 8-8 record.
That's it. That's another thing that I agree with Jordan Peterson about. I want equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome.
Right.
More black people at university is an equality of outcome.
What's that?
Having more black people at university is, you know, affirmative action. Would be equality of outcome. The idea is to get more people into university, right? You accept more black people than white people, and that would be the outcome.
Do they even do that anymore? Did they acknowledge that that's being done?
Yeah.
Well, I don't like the idea of affirmative action. Try to convince me otherwise if you want to, D.
Okay, we just had a big discussion about how a lot of black people have no history, about how they're only a few generations out of bondage and slavery and all this, and a lot of them grew up in shitty environments with ignorant parents. It's clearly more difficult for them to get ahead, and especially financially and all that, to get into a good college and have the opportunity to maybe, you know, become something. So it stands to reason that you might want to put a little more emphasis towards getting these, or giving these people a little help, to level the playing field.
See, for like my problem is that it depends on what you mean by a little help, and like depending on the person, there are going to be situational differences that determine how much help they need.
Well,
So, I mean, like
let's get it.
let's say like to at the least it sounds very difficult, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it at all.
You have a bunch of people who have the same test scores and are about the same. They rate about the same. You could pick and choose, and it wouldn't really make a difference on paper. And yet you take two black people and one white person, as opposed to taking two white people and one black person. Something as simple as that. Put everything else aside.
I mean,
Okay, so how do you determine like what white people get excluded? Like this is where people start to have a problem with it,
start
like
to get
more
queasy,
than I do.
saying someone's getting fucked, and the reason they're getting fucked is they're being discriminated against because of their color. That's the problem with affirmative action was necessary in the 60s and so on because there was systemic racism and they simply wouldn't let people through the door. And so to correct that, they forced the numbers up by saying, I don't care if everything else is equal, the black guy's getting the nod because they've been fucked for so long.
Right. Isn't there something?
I think I could be persuaded that remedy made sense, around the time I was born and so on. But now, I don't know, man.
But you would have to believe there's not enough systemic racism out there today.
See, I'm not convinced of that. That doesn't mean that I don't think that there's a lot of racism, of course. I think there is a lot of racism, especially in America, perhaps. But I'm not really convinced, which might be partially because I haven't looked for enough evidence that there's that level of systemic racism.
So you see what this is like how this whole thing goes in circles when it comes to education, the Charles Murray thing, right? Like it all fits in because these are the questions that everyone has and how it goes around. If you don't help these people and say, okay, well, everyone, which I understand, I sympathize with. Why should you choose one person over another person just because of their color, whether it's white to black or black to white, whatever. But if you do that, then you would have to you have to say that you're admitting that there's not that much racism in America. You would have to say that.
That's not what I said or what I meant.
Not enough to warrant.
Yeah, like to me, that ideally, and the key word here is ideally, we should all live in a meritocracy. But I don't know how pragmatic it is to achieve that.
Yeah, but the thing is like if you let's say you don't give these people some I think one thing that might solve this is to help them on the front end instead of the back end, and you'll solve this issue of equality of outcome because if you help black kids, especially when they're young, maybe financially. Maybe ensure they have work or something. Help them out as they're learning, instead of saying, "Okay, we're gonna pick them over the white guy when they get to college."
But like how do you determine like the numbers? The numbers of people that you help though, like should it be all black people and then no white people get help? And like when you talk about like equality of outcome, like what would be an equality of outcome? Like some kind of quota, like 50% black people, 50% white people?
No, well that's what I'm saying. Instead of having some sort of like college quota, you would just focus more resources into areas where slums where people have to live where it's heavily black environment, and give those communities additional assistance or something. I mean, I'm just saying that if you were to administer the help there as opposed to at the end of the road, I think it would appease both sides more. No.
Oh, okay. I can agree with that. Put more resources where more resources are needed. Is that what you're saying?
Put them at the front end instead of the back end. So you're not just choosing a black person over a white person just because of race. In the end, you still are making a a point to help level a playing field, but you're doing it in their development as opposed to at the end.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds difficult to implement, but it makes sense.
Very much so, and tough to even talk about, because you're talking about favoring one race over another financially, and that's just difficult for people to wrap their heads around. But that's where white privilege comes into play, because the reason you're doing it is because you believe that a lot of black people, especially poor black people, have it tougher. It's more difficult to climb the ladder.
Yeah, well, that seems like pretty. I mean, it seems like a lot of people are aware of that.
It's
Which is it's not that's not to say I'm trying to belittle that point at all.
No, I know, but the solution's the tough part. See, like, you could say categorically that a person with a black name gets like 30% less callbacks for an interview in America. That's a fact. That's an average. So it's palpable. I mean, it's there. Just a question of how much is it there, and how much resources, additional resources do you give if you go that way.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's why there are a lot of factors involved with this and that make it very difficult to determine.
For sure. Right. But guys, I think let's wrap this up. It's 10. I gotta go to bed. I gotta work in the morning.
Yeah, I think we've been talking for like at least 3.5 hours or so.
God. It's been long. But
yeah.
I really think it was like such a good conversation, because like
this was an awesome conversation. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, hopefully we'll do it again sometime. And yeah, Ed, I'll talk to Hayden and Bruce about the three of us talking, because it would be interesting for you guys to talk about religion. That'd be really fun.
Yeah, I'm interested in his
cool.
views, how he applies, liberalism to his beliefs. And I'll listen to I actually listened to 5 minutes of that podcast live, but I like I said, I only caught 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, check it out if you want to, and let me know what you think. Yeah. So yeah, I'll just say what I like to say at all the end of my videos here, and then you guys can offer any plugs that you want to. I already put both of your Twitter handles or whatever you call them on here.
Cool.
So all right, thanks everyone so much for watching and listening. This is a long conversation, but hopefully as exciting for you as it was for all of us. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Hope you all had some Mindgasms. I certainly learned a lot. And thank you so much for everyone who's subscribed to my channel and contributed to me on Patreon. And thank you so fucking much to anyone else who subscribed to my YouTube channel and contributes to me on Patreon. That really means a lot to me, and it allows me to do more stuff like this and keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. I love you all. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. That's the one thing that science can tell us objectively about morality. All right, you guys want to give some plugs there?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Sam's Bulldog at Edward M. Kennedy 2, and you can find me on YouTube as Sam's Bulldog. I defend the views of the new atheists and others. Talk about science and philosophy. Check me out. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Andrew. And thank you.
You're welcome anytime, man. Always good to talk with you. And I'm glad that you guys finally got to talk too.
Yeah, man, it was a great talk, and we really got to hit on everything I wanted to hit on, and I'm glad we got to like dig into the nuance. It was a good time. My Twitter is DJ Medici, Medici, and hit me up on there or wherever mixed mental artists are found. Thank you, man.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much, guys, and hopefully we can do this again. It was a great conversation. All right. Adios until next time, everyone.